I'm gonna tell you a scary story tonight about a forgotten hospital. But before I do, I want to ask you to subscribe if you're new. And if you are a regular viewer, well, then thank you for coming back. I appreciate it. You guys have been asking for more scary stories, so that's what we're doing tonight. This one comes from a Reddit user. This happened in Wales, so let's get into it. I was working as a psychiatric nurse in an old abandoned asylum that had been converted into apartments. The building was massive with long, dark corridors and barred windows. A colleague and I were asked by a resident to go and check on their relative, who hadn't been seen for some time and whose medication had also not been collected. We went to the flat, knocked the door and found no one there. So we decided to look round. The only other place they could be was in the basement, which was locked up tight and looked like it had been for a very long time. It was clear that no one went down there anymore. The staff who still worked there refused to go down there alone. They said it was haunted and there were regular reports of strange happenings. The doors and windows had all been sealed up and the entire floor was covered in dust and cobwebs. There were old files and papers strewn around, though, and it was clear that at some point someone had gone down there. We eventually found the person we were looking for sitting in a chair in the corner, drawing pictures of eyes peering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. They didn't react when we walked in, but when we tried to speak to them, they responded in a voice that sounded like it belonged to an old woman. They told us they had been hiding down here because the voices were driving them crazy. They claimed that they could hear people screaming in pain and begging for help. After they had calmed down a bit, we got them to come back upstairs with us. On the way out, we noticed the basement door was open, which was odd because we had left it shut. We put it down to one of the many drafts and headed home. A few days later, my colleague was taking a shower when she heard a knock on the bathroom window. She looked up just in time to see a flash of movement outside. She dried herself off and went to investigate. The window was closed and locked, and there was no sign of anyone having climbed in or broken in. She shrugged it off and went back to the changing room where she found this drawing. It was done in the same style as the previous drawing and depicted two stick figures, one of which was peeking over a shoulder at the other. My colleague showed me the drawing and we agreed that it must have been done by the same person who had made the previous picture. We couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next few weeks, more and more drawings appeared in various places around the building. At first, they were just stick figures and crude drawings of eyes and mouths, but then they became more detailed and disturbing. Some showed people being pulled through the floor or levitating above the ground. Others showed shadowy figures with long, sharp teeth and claws. My colleague and I started to notice other strange things happening around the building as well. Doors would slam shut, lights would flicker, and sometimes we would hear faint cries echoing down the corridors. We even saw what looked like an old wheelchair moving by itself down a hallway. It wasn't until one night that we finally caught sight of the patient again. It was 3 a.m., and I was making my rounds when I heard what sounded like screams in the distance. I couldn't quite make out what they were saying, but it sounded like they were calling for help. I followed the sound and it led me to one of the old barred windows. I looked out and saw what looked like a procession of shadowy figures moving through the grass. They were tall and thin and seemed to be floating above the ground. I watched them for a while, but they were too far away for me to make out any details. Then just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen because I knew they wouldn't believe me. And sure enough, when I mentioned it in passing the next day, my colleagues just laughed and said I should get a grip on my imagination. That was until one of the other nurses came running into the staff room, visibly shaken. She told us that she had been making her rounds when she saw what looked like an old woman standing by the window. She said the woman looked like she was trying to get out, but when she went to open the window to help her, the woman vanished. We all exchanged uneasy glances and decided to leave work early. On our way home, my colleague and I decided to walk through the grounds of the hospital instead of taking the main road. As we made our way through the overgrown pathways, we could feel the air growing colder around us. The trees seemed to be closing in on either side of us, and the shadows from the leaves danced around us in macabre shapes. We quickened our pace, and just as we rounded a bend, we saw the group of figures again. They were closer this time, and we could see that they were all in old-fashioned clothes. Some of them seemed to be patients in nightgowns, and others looked like doctors or nurses. They were still floating above the ground and seemed to be heading towards the main building. My colleague and I stopped and watched them disappear into the darkness. We didn't go back to that hospital again until the following Monday. When we did, we brought a priest with us. He had heard our story and agreed to come and bless the building. As he made his way through the corridors, he told us that he could feel the presence of unhappy spirits all around him. He told us that these spirits were not dangerous, but that they were sad and needed our help. He said that the best thing we could do for them was to remember them and to tell their story. And that's why I'm telling your story now. He performed the blessing and then left us to get on with our work. Things continued as normal after that, although we did find more drawings, this time of the priest and other members of the clergy. Some of them were welcoming, but others showed them being dragged into the depths of hell. We never saw the group of spirits again, but we often heard them at night, whispering and moaning in the darkness. Eventually, the building was sold and most of the apartments were bought by young families. It wasn't long before the whispers were heard again and the drawings started appearing once more. The residents called the police, who came and took the drawings away for analysis. They couldn't determine who had made them, but they did find traces of a substance that is only produced by the body after death. The building was put up for sale again and has remained empty ever since. The locals say that it is haunted and that anyone who goes near it will never be the same again. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can tell you that I'll never forget the feeling of dread and sadness that I felt when I was in that building, and I still have nightmares about those shadowy figures to this day. That was the Forgotten Hospital. Did you like it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you did, consider checking out my podcast where I publish similar content. Also, don't forget to subscribe and come back for more scary stories every week. Until then, happy haunting.